The Emergence Protocol. The holographic projection cast an eerie blue glow across Commander Elena Reyes's weathered face. She stood motionless in the dimly lit command center, studying the map of human territories, small patches of blue amid an overwhelming sea of crimson. 17 years of war with the Voidborn had reduced humanity to these scattered remnants. Earth remained, though half its cities lay in ruins. The colonies on Mars had fallen last month. The mining stations orbiting Jupiter went silent just 2 weeks ago. Reyes rubbed her temples, fighting off another migraine. Sleep had become a luxury she could rarely afford. Her reflection in the darkened viewport showed a woman barely recognizable from the confident officer who'd taken command at the war's beginning. Her once black hair was now streaked with silver, her face lined with the weight of countless impossible decisions. The command center's doors slid open with a soft hiss. General Marcus Trent entered, his uniform immaculate, despite the late hour. Reyes had known him long enough to see past his composed exterior. His eyes betrayed the truth. "The Council has made their decision," Trent said, his voice unnaturally steady. He placed a small metallic cube on the console between them. Reyes stared at it, understanding immediately what it represented. "How long?" "1 year, Commander. We have 1 year to turn the tide, or Terminus Protocol activates." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Terminus Protocol. Humanity's final option. If the war couldn't be won, humanity would deny the Voidborn their victory through coordinated voluntary extinction. A horrific choice, but one that seemed increasingly rational as the Voidborn conquered colony after colony. "They can't be serious," Reyes whispered, though she knew they were. "Humanity's birth rate has fallen below sustainable levels. Our resource production can't support what remains of our population. The Voidborn have taken too much." Trent's voice remained clinical, detached. "If we cannot win, we end on our terms." Reyes turned back to the holographic display, watching the small blue dots that represented billions of surviving humans. 1 year to save what remained of her species, impossible by conventional means. "Then we use Project Phantom," she said firmly. Trent's eyes widened slightly. "The neural modification program. The tests." "The tests showed success." Reyes cut him off. "Dr. Sengupta has been requesting deployment authorization for months. The side effects are better than extinction." Reyes picked up the authorization cube. "Prepare the facility beneath Olympus Base. I'll select the candidates myself." 3 days later, Commander Reyes stood in a large chamber deep beneath the lunar surface. 20 soldiers stood at attention before her. Men and women of different backgrounds, ages, and specialties. All volunteers, all aware they were likely volunteering to die. "At ease," Reyes said. The soldiers relaxed slightly but remained focused. "You all know why you're here. You've been briefed on the fundamentals of Project Phantom." She gestured to her right, where a woman in a lab coat stood quietly. Though small in stature, her presence commanded attention. "Dr. Sengupta will explain exactly what you're volunteering for." Dr. Sengupta stepped forward. "Unlike many scientists," she spoke plainly, "the Voidborn locate us through technology that detects electrical signals, the signals our brains and nervous systems naturally produce. My modification alters those signals, rendering you invisible to Voidborn detection systems." Captain James Mercer, a veteran with a cybernetic left arm, raised his hand. "So we become invisible." "Not to their eyes," Dr. Sengupta clarified, "but to their scanners, security systems, and targeting computers. They'll still see you if they look directly at you, but their technology won't register your presence." "And the risks, Doctor?" asked Lieutenant Sophia Chen, her face bearing the scarring from a Voidborn energy weapon. Dr. Sengupta's expression grew solemn. "The modification forces your nervous system to function differently than nature intended. Extended use causes progressive neural damage." "What kind of damage?" Chen pressed, her voice steady. "Memory loss, coordination problems, eventually, complete neural failure." Dr. Sengupta looked at each soldier in turn. death. The room remained silent. No one moved. "How long do we have?" asked Mercer. "With current technology, perhaps 6 months of active field use before symptoms become severe. No more than 8 months before fatal damage." Commander Rice watched carefully for signs of hesitation. She saw none. "We're asking you to become ghosts," she said quietly. "Not just to the enemy, but eventually to yourselves. Your sacrifices will not be public. Your families will be told you died in standard operations. No one outside this room can know about Project Phantom." Mercer looked at his fellow soldiers, then back at Reyes. "With respect, Commander, we're already dead. The only question is whether our deaths will mean something." Reyes nodded once, acknowledging the truth of his words. "The procedure takes 6 hours," Dr. Sengupta explained. "It's not painful, but you'll feel different afterward. Your senses will change. You'll perceive the world differently." "When do we start?" asked Chen. "Now," Rice said, "we've prepared 20 medical bays. Each of you will be paired with a medical team. The modifications begin immediately." As the soldiers filed out toward the medical wing, Commander Rice caught Dr. Sengupta's arm. "Will it work?" she asked quietly. Dr. Sengupta's eyes were tired but determined. "The modification works perfectly, Commander. They will be invisible to void-borne technology." "That's not what I asked." Sengupta understood. "Will it save humanity?" "I don't know. But it gives us a chance we didn't have before." Reyes watched as Captain Mercer, the last to leave, walked through the door toward his fate. 1 year, she whispered to herself. 1 year to save everything or end everything. The transport ship drifted silently through space, its engines dark, moving only on momentum. Inside, 4 human soldiers prepared for the most dangerous mission of the war. Captain Mercer checked his weapon one final time. The pistol felt heavier in his hands than it had before the procedure. 3 weeks had passed since he'd become a ghost, and everything felt different now. Colors were too bright, sounds too sharp. Sometimes when he woke, he couldn't remember his name for several minutes. 2 minutes to infiltration, he said to his team. Lieutenant Chen nodded, her dark eyes showing no fear despite her rapid heartbeat. With her were specialists Rivera and Novak, both checking their equipment meticulously. All 4 wore black stealth suits with no markings, no insignia, nothing to identify them as human soldiers. Through the small viewport, they could see their target. The void-borne command vessel was massive, at least 5 times larger than any human ship. Its strange, asymmetrical design resembled a cluster of obsidian crystals that somehow held together in perfect harmony. Pulses of purple energy occasionally flashed across its surface. "Remember the objective," Chen said quietly. "We need access to their central database. Nothing else matters." Mercer nodded. "The neural modifications should keep us invisible to their sensors, but their eyes can still see us. Stay in shadow. Move carefully." Their transport approached a maintenance port on the underside of the massive alien ship. Dr. Sengupta had studied void-borne designs for years and had identified this as their best entry point. "Suits on," ordered Mercer. The team secured their helmets, and air hissed as the seals locked. The transport's airlock opened, and one by one, they'd pushed off, floating the short distance to the void-borne ship. The stars shone cold and distant around them. Rivera reached the alien airlock first. He attached a small device to the control panel, and after a moment, lights blinked, and the door slid open. Once inside, they waited in the small chamber as it pressurized with breathable air. The inner door opened, and they were in. "We're through," whispered Novak. "No alarms." "Stay close," said Mercer. "Remember your training." They moved like shadows through the vessel's corridors. The inside of the void-borne ship was disorienting to human eyes. The walls curved in strange geometries that seemed to shift when not directly observed. The lighting pulsed slowly in patterns that made Mercer's head ache. The air smelled wrong, not unpleasant, but alien in a way he couldn't describe. They passed several void-borne. The aliens were tall and slender, their bodies composed of what appeared to be translucent black crystal, with swirling purple energy visible beneath the surface. They had no recognizable faces, just smooth surfaces with occasional flickering lights where sensory organs might be. None noticed the human intruders. The ghost modifications were working. The central data hub should be 2 levels down, Chen said, checking the small map on her wrist device. They found a gravity well that carried them deeper into the ship. The lower levels were quieter, with fewer Voidborn present. The team reached a large door marked with alien symbols that shifted and changed even as they watched. "This is it," said Rivera. "The central database." Novak placed another device on the door controls. It took longer this time, sweat beading on her forehead as she worked. Finally, the door slid open. Inside was a large chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with purple light. Each crystal contained flowing patterns that seemed to move with purpose, data storage beyond human technology. At the center stood a control console. "Watch the door," Mercer told Rivera and Novak. Chen and Mercer approached the central panel. He attached a translation device and began downloading files. The device had been programmed to search for specific information: battle plans, fleet movements, weaknesses. Minutes passed slowly. Each sound made them tense. A drop of sweat ran down Chen's face inside her helmet, but she couldn't wipe it away. "How much longer?" she whispered. "Almost there," Mercer replied, eyes fixed on the data flowing across his screen. Suddenly, he stopped. "Wait. This can't be right." "What is it?" "They're not conquering us for resources," he muttered, scanning the alien text. "That's what we always thought. But look at this." Chen glanced at the screen. The translation was rough, but clear enough to understand. The Voidborn weren't desperate for Earth's resources or territory. "They're harvesting our consciousness," Mercer said in horror. "They're collectors of sentience." The data showed images of humans in strange containers. Their bodies were kept alive, but their minds were connected to Voidborn systems. They were being studied, experienced, absorbed. "They're a hive mind," Chen whispered, understanding dawning. "They consume individual consciousness to expand their collective. We're not resources, we're experiences to be assimilated." Mercer's face hardened. "This changes everything. We need to get this back to." A terrible scream cut him off. They turned to see Specialist Rivera on his knees, hands clutching his head. His body convulsed in pain. "My head," he screamed. "Something's wrong." Lieutenant Chen realized with horror. His ghost modifications are failing. The moment the modifications failed, alarms blared throughout the ship. Rivera was suddenly visible to Voidborn sensors. Within seconds, the door slid open and Voidborn security units rushed in, their crystalline bodies glowing brightly with combat energy. "Go!" Novak shouted as she pulled out her weapon. Her face was twisted in pain, but her eyes were clear. "Complete the mission." Rivera struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his nose. He fired at the approaching Voidborn. "Get out of here. The data is all that matters." Mercer hesitated for only a second, then grabbed the data device, unplugging it from the Voidborn system. "This way," he shouted to Chen, pointing to a second exit he had spotted on the map. They ran as Novak and Rivera provided covering fire behind them. The sounds of energy weapons filled the corridor. Chen looked back one last time and saw Novak fall as a Voidborn energy beam struck her chest. Rivera continued firing even as more guards poured in. "Don't stop," Mercer yelled, pulling Chen forward. They ran through service corridors, following the escape route they had memorized. Behind them, they heard Rivera's final scream cut suddenly short. Against all odds, they reached their extraction point. The small human transport was waiting. They jumped inside just as Voidborn ships began to mobilize. As the transport accelerated away from the command vessel, Mercer and Chen sat in silence. The data device contained information that could help save humanity, but the cost had been high. They knew the risks, Mercer said quietly, though his voice shook. We all did. Chen nodded, her eyes wet with tears she refused to let fall. Their sacrifice won't be wasted. We'll make sure of it. The transport disappeared into the darkness of space, carrying the truth about the Voidborn and the memory of 2 soldiers who died so humanity might live. The final countdown. Commander Elena Reyes stood at the large viewport of Olympus Base, watching Earth rotate slowly below. 6 months had passed since the first Ghost mission. 6 months remained until the Terminus Protocol deadline. Half their time gone. She wondered if they had made enough progress. Behind her, the command center buzzed with activity. Officers moved between screens, spoke into communication devices, and studied tactical displays of star systems. The room felt alive with energy. For the first time in years, there was hope. Lieutenant Wei approached with a data tablet in her hand. Like everyone else, she worked too many hours and ate too little. Her uniform hung loose on her thin frame. Operation Severed Light was successful, Wei reported. All 15 targets hit simultaneously. No ghost teams detected. Reyes turned from the viewport. Show me. They walked to the main display table. Wei activated the screen, bringing up images from across different star systems. Each showed Voidborn ships and bases, many damaged, some completely destroyed. The Voidborn are attacking their own vessels, reported Wei, pointing to intelligence feeds. They can't understand how their communications are being disrupted. The images showed Voidborn ships firing on each other. Their normally coordinated movements had become chaotic. In one recording, a large Voidborn carrier destroyed 3 smaller vessels from its own fleet. They depend completely on their technology to identify friend from enemy, Wei explained. When our ghost teams sabotage their identification systems, they begin seeing every ship as an intruder. Reyes watched the Voidborn confusion with grim satisfaction. After years of losing, humanity was finally hitting back effectively. How soon until they repair the damage? She asked. Days, maybe weeks, but by then, we'll strike elsewhere. Wei's eyes shone with rare excitement. They can't defend everywhere at once. The door opened, and Dr. Singupta entered. The scientist looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly, not from neural damage like the ghost operators, but from too many sleepless nights. Dr. Singupta, Reyes greeted her. Your ghost teams performed admirably. Singupta nodded but didn't smile. The modified neural patterns worked better than expected. The Voidborn didn't detect our people until they were already leaving. And our ghost operators? Reyes asked, her voice softer. 23 have died from neural degradation, Dr. Singupta said quietly. 8 during missions, 15 afterward as their brains simply stopped working. The command room seemed to grow colder. Everyone knew the ghost operators were sacrificing themselves, but hearing the numbers made it real. The improvements to the procedure have slowed the degradation. Singupta continued, but not stopped it. Every mission burns away more neural pathways. Reyes looked down at her hands. 23 dead, and more would follow. We honor their sacrifice, she said firmly. Each ghost operator knows the cost. That's not all, Singupta added. We have 500 new volunteers. Reyes looked up in surprise. So many. Word has spread about our successes. People want to help, even knowing they might not survive. Singupta's voice cracked slightly. Parents of young children, elderly couples. They are volunteering together. Lieutenant Wei cleared her throat. We're being selective, taking only those with military training or specialized skills. Reyes nodded. Hope was a powerful force, sometimes dangerously so. There's something else you should see, Wei said. She led them to a secure room at the back of the command center. Inside, behind a transparent wall, sat a Voidborn. The alien was tall and slender, its crystalline body dimmer than those they had seen in combat. The purple energy that typically swirled vigorously within its form now pulsed slowly, weakly. Metal restraints designed to disrupt its energy field held it in place. "We captured this one during the last mission," Wei explained. "It's a communication specialist, not a warrior." Rai studied the alien carefully. In 17 years of war, humans had captured very few Voidborn alive. "Has it provided any useful information?" she asked. "More than we expected," Wei replied. "It seems to fear isolation even more than death." She pressed a button, and a recording played. The Voidborn's voice, translated by a computer into flat human speech, filled the room. "Separation is death to us. Our consciousness exists collectively. To be alone is unimaginable horror. Please, reconnect me." "They're connected mentally?" Rides asked. "Not exactly," Sengupta explained. "They're individuals, but they constantly share thoughts and experiences through their energy network. Being cut off from that network causes extreme distress, like solitary confinement for humans, but worse. Their entire society depends on this connection," Wei added. "Their military, their government, everything." Rice considered this information carefully. "So when our ghost teams disrupt their communications, they're not just confused," Wei finished. "They're terrified." The door to the secure room opened, and Captain Mercer entered slowly. He walked with a noticeable limp that hadn't been there a month ago. His hands trembled at his sides, and when he spoke, his words sometimes came out slurred, all signs of advancing neural degradation. "Commander," he said, saluting carefully, "I heard we captured one alive." Reyes returned the salute. "Captain, should you be out of medical?" Mercer's smile was tired but determined. "With respect, Commander, I'll rest when the war is over." He moved closer to the transparent wall, studying the Voidborn with intense focus. The alien seemed to recoil, its energy patterns fluctuating rapidly. "It fears us," Mercer observed. "It fears being alone," Wei corrected. "We've kept it isolated from any Voidborn signals." Mercer nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the alien. "I've been thinking about what we learned from the command ship, about why they're fighting us. To harvest our consciousness. To absorb us," Rice said bitterly. "Like specimens." "Yes, but why?" Mercer turned to face them, his eyes suddenly clear despite his physical deterioration. "They want our experiences, our emotions, our individuality. Things they don't have because they're always connected." He pointed to the captured Voidborn. "Look how it suffers from just days of isolation. Imagine a species that never experiences true individuality. They're fascinated by us because we're different." Reyes considered his words. "How does this help us win the war?" Mercer's hands trembled, but his voice grew stronger. "Don't you see? We don't need to kill them all. We just need to disconnect them." The room fell silent as they absorbed his meaning. "Break their network," Sengupta said slowly. "Not just temporarily, but permanently." "If each Voidborn fears isolation more than death," Mercer continued, "what would happen if their entire species was suddenly disconnected?" Reyes looked back at the alien behind the wall. It had curled its crystalline form inward, as if trying to become smaller. "Could we do it?" she asked. "Disable their entire network?" Dr. Sengupta rubbed her tired eyes. "Theoretically, yes, if we could identify and strike the main relay points of their communication system simultaneously. But we'd need to reach their homeworld. No one has ever found their homeworld." "The data from the command ship," Mercer said. "It contained coordinates. I memorized them before my memory started failing." He tapped his trembling hand against his temple. "It's still in here. I know where they come from." Reyes felt a chill run through her body. The Voidborn homeworld, the heart of their empire. If they could strike there. "Prepare a briefing," she ordered. "I want a plan on my desk in 24 hours." She looked at each person in the room. 6 months to save humanity. Let's make them count. The lunar base had transformed over the past 3 months. New facilities had been built deeper underground. More soldiers filled the halls. The medical wing had expanded to accommodate the growing number of ghost operators. But the most important change was invisible. For the first time in 17 years, humans were winning the war. Captain Mercer made his way slowly to the main briefing room. Each step required conscious effort now. His left leg dragged uselessly. His hands shook so violently that he kept them in his pockets. The ghost modifications had damaged his brain more severely than most. Some days he forgot his own name. Other days, he couldn't feel his limbs at all. The doctors said he had weeks left, maybe less. But his mind was clear today. It had to be. Today, he would present the plan that might save humanity. The large briefing room was full when he arrived. Commander Rice sat at the head of the table. Dr. Singupta stood nearby, shadows under her eyes. Military leaders from Earth and the surviving colonies filled the other seats. Lieutenant Chen sat near the back, leaning heavily on a cane. Her once steady hands now trembled worse than Mercer's. They nodded to each other, fellow ghosts, both fading. Captain Mercer, Rice said, "We're ready for your presentation." Mercer took a deep breath and walked to the front of the room. His voice came out slurred, damaged by the neural changes, but his words were clear. 3 months remain until Terminus Protocol, he began. We've hurt the Voidborn, confused them, but they're still too strong. We need to strike at their heart. He pressed a button, and a hologram appeared above the table, showing a strange planet. Its surface was covered with crystalline structures that pulsed with purple energy. Massive spires reached toward space, each connected to the others by visible streams of energy. The Voidborn homeworld, Mercer said. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the image. No human had ever seen it before. This is their central node, he continued, pointing to the largest structure at the planet's north pole. All Voidborn consciousness flows through here. It's their version of a capital city, but it's also much more. It's the heart of their network. He coughed, a trickle of blood running from his nose. Dr. Singupta moved to help him, but he waved her away. If we can place disruption devices at these 7 points, he said, highlighting locations around the central node, we can create a cascading failure in their entire communications network. Not temporary interference like our current missions, but a complete permanent severing of their collective consciousness. Every Voidborn in the galaxy, cut off at once, Lieutenant Chen added from the back of the room. Isolated, alone, it would be. Commander Rice searched for the word. Devastating, Dr. Singupta finished. Based on what we've learned from our captive, it would be the equivalent of psychological torture on a species-wide scale. The room was quiet as everyone considered the implications. This wasn't just warfare, it was something else entirely. Do we have the right? Asked one of the colony representatives. They've been harvesting our minds for 17 years, Mercer replied, his voice hardening. Turning us into experiences they can consume. They started this war. We're ending it. Commander Rice studied the hologram. How do we get to these points? The Voidborn homeworld will be heavily defended. A single ship, Mercer said. Small, fast, with a full complement of ghost operators. We've mapped their sensor network. If we time it correctly, we can slip through during a synchronization gap. And once on the surface, Rice asked. 7 teams, 7 targets, Chen said. Once the devices are planted, we activate them simultaneously. The neural cost. Dr. Singupta asked quietly. Mercer and Chen exchanged glances. Total, Mercer said simply. None of the ghost operators will survive this mission. A heavy silence fell over the room. How many operators would be needed? Rice finally asked. 28, Mercer answered. 4 per team. I'll lead them. Your neural degradation is too advanced, Dr. Singupta protested. You might not even survive the journey. I'll last long enough, Mercer insisted. I have to be there. I'm the only one who knows exactly where to place the devices. Commander Rice stood, her decision made. Begin preparations. I want this mission ready in 2 weeks. If it succeeds, we end this war on our terms. If it fails, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen if they failed. As the meeting dispersed, Mercer approached Chen. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. "Your degradation is progressing faster than they predicted." Chen smiled sadly. "We're all dead already, remember? The only question is whether our deaths will mean something." 2 weeks later, a sleek black ship slipped silently through the darkness of space, its stealth systems making it nearly invisible even to human sensors. Inside, 28 ghost operators prepared for their final mission. Captain Mercer sat in the pilot's seat, his trembling hands secured to the controls with medical tape. He could no longer feel his fingers, but muscle memory allowed him to fly. Beside him, Lieutenant Chen monitored the sensors. "Approaching the outer detection perimeter," she reported. "Synchronization gap in 30 seconds. Behind them, the other ghost operators checked their equipment one last time. All wore the same black stealth suits with no insignia. All carried the same specialized disruption devices. All knew they wouldn't be returning. 20 seconds. Chen counted down. 15. 10. Mercer guided the ship toward a specific point in space where the voidborn sensors briefly overlapped, creating a momentary blind spot during their synchronization cycle. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're clear. The ship slipped through the gap. Ahead, the voidborn homeworld grew larger in their viewport. Up close, it was both beautiful and alien, a world of crystal and energy, pulsing with purple light. "Beginning descent," Mercer announced, his voice barely understandable now. "Atmospheric entry in 60 seconds." The ship shuddered as it entered the alien atmosphere. Mercer fought to keep it stable, his failing body barely responsive to his commands. Somehow, they made it through, emerging into the skies above a vast crystalline landscape. "Landing zone in sight," Chen reported. Mercer brought the ship down in a hidden valley between two massive crystal formations. As soon as they touched down, the ghost operators moved into action with practiced efficiency. 7 teams, 7 targets, Mercer reminded them. "You all have your assignments. Synchronize your chronometers. Devices must activate simultaneously." The teams gathered one last time before departing. No speeches were needed. They had all made their peace with what was to come. "For Earth," someone said quietly. "For humanity," the others responded. Then they were moving, each team heading toward their designated target. Mercer led the team assigned to the central node, the most heavily guarded and most crucial target. They moved like shadows across the crystalline landscape, avoiding voidborn patrols with practiced ease. Their ghost modifications kept them invisible to sensors, and they stayed out of direct sight. As they approached the central node, Mercer felt his body betraying him further. His vision blurred. His legs threatened to give out entirely. Blood trickled from his nose and ears, signs of accelerating neural degradation. "Almost there," Chen whispered, supporting him as they climbed a crystal outcropping that overlooked the massive central structure. The central node rose before them, a towering spire of crystal and energy that pulsed with the collective consciousness of the entire voidborn species. Streams of purple energy flowed into it from all directions. "Set the device here," Mercer instructed, pointing to a junction where multiple energy streams converge. Chen carefully placed the disruption device, securing it to the crystal surface. The other 2 members of their team stood guard, weapons ready. "Device planted," Chen reported, activating the timer. 17 minutes until synchronization. Mercer touched his communicator. "Team 1, in position. Report status." One by one, the other teams reported in. All had reached their targets. All had planted their devices. 17 minutes, Mercer said. "Then we end this war." They waited, hidden among the crystals, watching as Voidborn moved below them, unaware of the humans or what was about to happen. Mercer felt himself drifting, his consciousness slipping away as his damaged brain continued to fail. Chen gripped his hand tightly, anchoring him to the present. "Stay with me, James," she whispered. "Just a little longer." 5 minutes before synchronization, alarms suddenly blared throughout the complex. Voidborn security forces began moving with purpose, weapons drawn. "They've detected one of the devices," Chen realized with horror. Mercer forced himself to focus. "Which one?" She checked her communicator. "Team 4. They're under attack." "Can they hold out for 5 minutes?" Mercer asked. The communicator crackled with weapons fire and shouting. Then silence. "Team 4 is down," Chen reported, "but their device is still active." 4 minutes. "Team 6 has been compromised," came another report. "We're surrounded." 3 minutes. The communicator filled with the sounds of battle as more teams were discovered. 2 minutes. "They're converging on the central node," Chen said. "They know we're here." Mercer pulled himself up, fighting through the pain and disorientation. "We need to draw them away from the device." "James, you can barely stand." 1 minute, Sophia. "We just need to hold them off for 1 minute." He pulled out his weapon. "For humanity." Chen nodded, understanding. For humanity. They stepped out from their hiding place, firing at the approaching Voidborn. Their weapons cut through the crystalline bodies, shattering them. But there were too many. Energy beams lanced back, scorching the ground around them. 30 seconds. Chen fell, an energy beam piercing her chest. She looked up at Mercer, a smile on her bloodied lips. "Worth it," she whispered. 20 seconds. Mercer stood alone, firing until his weapon overheated. The Voidborn surrounded him, their crystalline forms pulsing with anger. 10 seconds. An energy beam struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, vision darkening. 5 seconds. The Voidborn reached for him. 3, 2, 1. The world exploded in light. All across the Voidborn homeworld, the 7 disruption devices activated simultaneously, sending precisely calibrated energy pulses into the network. The pulses traveled along the energy streams, amplifying as they went, creating a cascading failure that spread outward at the speed of light. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The purple energy that had flowed so smoothly through the crystal structures suddenly stuttered, flickered, and died. The great spires that had channeled the collective consciousness of the Voidborn went dark. And throughout the galaxy, on every planet, ship and station, Voidborn suddenly found themselves alone in their own minds for the first time in their existence. The screams of an entire species echoed across the stars. On Earth, Commander Reyes stood in the command center, watching as reports flooded in from across human territory. Voidborn ships drifting powerless in space. Voidborn ground forces collapsing in confusion. Voidborn communications completely silent. "Status of the mission team?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Lieutenant Wei shook her head. "No."